Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I have my results from 100 kills of every single Bestiary boss. That's right, I took out 100 Farrels, 100 Venomouses, and 100 Sackwalls, as well as the Crab. So with all of that said, why were we doing this? I wanted to figure out what the drop chances roughly of each of the different items from these Bestiary bosses were, as well as figuring out when was the best chance to farm them and when was not too great to farm them in pretty much any league as long as they don't change the drop rates. So with that said, I want to give you guys a bit of an intro to Bestiary farming, and then we'll get straight into the data and I can show you guys what I've found. So to begin with, Bestiary farming, there are 4 different types of Spirit Beast boss. There is Farrel, the cat boss, Sackwall, the bird boss, Venomous, the spider boss, and lastly, Krikiani, the crab boss. So you might have heard of those already, but in general, Bestiary bosses are pretty niche content. Not too many people engage with them, and that is a very good thing for us. It gives us the biggest opportunity possible to make a lot of currency out of them. And the reason for this is because these bosses actually drop some pretty insane loot, and they are one of the only places you can obtain aspects for crafting on your items. So, you've decided you want to farm some Bestiary bosses. How do you get started? So in PoE, you can open up a Bestiary boss portal by finding a Spirit Beast animal. And you'll be able to find these in Ironharm missions within maps. They'll come up as a red beast icon. They're pretty rare, but for example, to open up Farrel's Den, you'll need a Farrak Tiger Alpha. These can also be obtained by using Bestiary Scarabs to kind of force Ironheart into the map and give you more chances at red beasts. So once you have a Spirit Beast, you can come over to the Menagerie and open up that boss portal, assuming you have a few yellow beasts to go along with it. Now, if you don't want to farm maps and Ironharm missions to get these, you can of course also buy these off other players. As beasts, any beast is actually tradable by capturing it with a Bestiary orb from your Menagerie. You can whack that up on your trade website of choice. So that's how you get into it and how you open up those portals. I generally recommend going and buying them, as it can be a little bit tedious to farm those out yourself, especially if you're going to farm a ton of them. So, there's actually a few other things to do with Bestiary as well, specifically to do with the drop table. So each of these beasts, let's say you buy a beast like Farrel, like the Farrak Tiger Alpha, let's say you buy it for 100 chaos. You can expect to get one of 4 items guaranteed from killing Farrel. You'll either get his head, his chest, his boots, or his gloves, and each of those will have a different value attached to them. You'll get one of those guaranteed pretty much every time. In addition to that, every time you kill Farrel, you will actually be able to capture him and you'll get him in your Menagerie as a beast that you can either use or sell on the trade websites. And this actually creates a situation where you're guaranteed an item of some value and you're guaranteed a beast. And these beasts generally actually go for quite a bit of currency. So let's say you spent 100 chaos and the Farrel sells for 30, you just recouped 30 C every time you kill the boss, and it actually kind of like offsets the cost of entry. And something that's really cool is that a lot of the time in league settings, you'll actually find the entry beast cost as much as the crafting beast that you capture, leading to the loot that you get from the boss being pretty much free, which is definitely a very good scenario to be in, and that's kind of when you want to be looking to farm these Bestiary bosses. But let's get into even more detail here. The cool thing about Bestiary is that when you capture a beast, every single person in your party gets it. So let's say that Farrel, you capture it for 30C, you bought the key for 100. If you have a 6-man party, suddenly that 30C is times 6, leading you to get 180C just from having a full group, which is pretty cool. correct me if I'm wrong with that math in the comments. But yeah, you almost double, or like pretty much double, paid off the key just from running in a full party, and then all of the uniques are free anyway. So definitely pretty interesting there, and you can engineer that in very cool ways if you kind of are a little bit smart about it. So definitely pretty interesting indeed. So with all of that said, Bestiary is a highly profitable activity, and if you get the most out of it, you're going to be having a pretty good time. But which beasts should you be farming, and when should you be farming them? That's why I did this test, and I'm going to share you guys the results now. So let's get straight into the spreadsheet. So as I mentioned, we have our 4 different Bestiary bosses here. We have Venomous, Farrell, Sackable, and Krikiani, and the prices you'll see here are based on standard, just to kind of make this video a little bit more relatable when it comes out. But I highly recommend taking my numbers for yourself and then plugging in whatever the league you're playing in's numbers so that you can see if it's profitable for yourself kind of at home. So let's get into it. Obviously we have the 4 items here that you can see that drop from the bosses, and then you have the beast and how many like you'll get of it, which is of course 100. You'll get one every time, and then you can see how much currency you can expect to make based on how big your party is, which is pretty cool as well. So let's start off with Venomous. What is the most valuable item on standard for Venomous? It is by far the gloves. You'll notice that each of these bosses has kind of 1 or 2 chase items, but all of them will fluctuate in price depending on the meta of the league. For example, in Blight League, summoners were very popular, and the chest piece, Sackawal's Nest, actually was going for around 2 to 3 exalts, whereas the keys were like 15C. And as you can see from my results here, I actually got 31 chest pieces, making Sackawal one of the most insane bosses to farm ever in probably the history of Blight League. And also, not only that, but you can see here the key is heavily offset by the price of the beast, especially when you get up into higher parties. But of course, these prices are based on standard, not on blight, so it won't be quite as good. But the information remains the same. So let's quickly go back to Venomous here. We actually got 36 gloves. It was the most common drop from Venomous, while being the best item, well, item perceived by the public, as it is very popular in poison builds. The second most popular item is the chest piece, Venomous's Shroud, and that is actually quite rare. So you can expect to get quite a few of these chest pieces, but you shouldn't rely on them. The big money makers in these Bestiary bosses are high ticket items, which are also fairly common. So for example, the chest piece on Sackawal in Blight League is very common as well, and that was going for a lot of currency. Similar to the gloves, these were going for a few exalts in Blight League as well, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of what you can expect there from Venomous, and it's pretty damn interesting in my opinion. So in terms of like the actual profit, you'll notice here that I have got the 6-man kind of spread. We've got 1-man, 2-man, 3-man, all the way up to 6-man, and that is because of course you can bring in your friends, or you can take advantage if you're lucky enough to have multiple computers. You can of course fully within the rules of PoE run multiple games on these computers. So if you have 2 computers, you can run 2 accounts and then get double the beast, in theory, if you wanted to go down that route. It's pretty interesting, and there's definitely quite a few options there. So that's Venomous, and generally I don't actually think I've seen a point in any league really where Venomous hasn't been worth running, at least with at least 2 people. Like if you can get like 2 players in, like you and a buddy, you're going to start making quite a lot of currency. Even on standard right now, if you run 100 Venomouses with 2 men, you're still going to make quite a lot of currency indeed. And it's going to be pretty good. It looks like you actually make 51C a run. I don't know if that's right. I kind of always doubt myself with these videos now. So pretty good indeed, pretty good currency per hour. Let's moving over here to Farrell, the big ticket item. How many Farrell's furs did I get, and is it worth it? So right now on standard, the portal entry of Farrell is 450C. I've never seen it that high in a league, and you can bet your biscuits in 3.9, it's not going to be that expensive, not even close. And I expect Farrell's fur to be a high ticket item, with it being a bow league, as it is one of the best choices for bow characters looking to get power and frenzy charges in boss fight scenarios. So it's going to be in big demand, and of course whenever you've got Farrell's fur, you also need the cat craft, which comes from Farrell himself. So it creates demand for the Farrell beast craft as well, meaning that will be fairly expensive as well. As you can see, it is already quite expensive on standard anyway. But how many Farrell's furs did we get? We actually got 12. So as you can see here, you can notice that it's about as common as the chest piece from Venomous, whereas the helmet is about as common as the gloves from Venomous. So you're kind of starting to see a bit of a pattern here. The one that I thought it was going to be around is it's about 35% for one of the items, 15 for one, and then 25 for the other two. And that is kind of a pattern that you can see followed pretty much everywhere except Krakiani. He's a bit of a weird one, but of course variance exists in PoE and you can't account for everything, so this isn't going to be solid drop rates or anything like that, but it definitely gives you a pretty good idea of what are the rare items and what are the common items. So with that said, of course, you're not actually going to make a lot of money here on standard, but when I ran this test in Blight, I actually made, I think it was upwards of 100 exalts from my runs in Farrell. Having said that though, we were doing a 6-man kind of split here, so we were getting a lot of currency, and even on standard right now, if you ran that 6-man split for 100 Farrells, you would make 10,000 chaos between you, and if you were some crazy computer guy and you had 2 computers each, you'd make 10,000 chaos between 3 of you, which would be pretty interesting indeed, and that's really taking advantage of how Bestiary works. Moving on, we have Sakwal, a similar pattern here. The helmet is actually the rare one here, which is pretty cool. And then we have the chest piece being very common, and then the boots probably like secondary as well. And then we have the gloves. So one of these is probably the 25% chance. I'm not sure which one it is, because we've got a bit of an interesting number spread here, but one of these will be more common than the others, which is pretty cool indeed if you ask me. So again, this one isn't running too hot on standard just because the items are very cheap. Having said that though, the portal entry is quite low and the beast is actually worth quite a bit. So you will see these kinds of things and they'll move up and down all around, and you kind of probably want to update this pretty often. I know I'll be updating mine pretty often with the prices on PoE Ninja, and you'll get a pretty good picture immediately of whether it's worth doing it or not. And that was kind of the goal of this experiment, and maybe I'll do a bit of a video series updating you guys on when you should farm certain things. So lastly, we have the least desirable of all of the spirit beasts to farm, and that is Krakiani. He's a very defensive based kind of build, kind of like thing here. All of his items are based around defense, so it's not really aimed at softcore as much as it is at hardcore in my opinion. So it's definitely a little bit of a more niche boss to farm, but as you can see here, you can still make a little bit of currency here off of him, which isn't too bad. But overall, like at the moment in standard, the most lucrative one to farm is of course Venomous. However, having said that though, if the massive premium wasn't slapped on Farrell, which it normally isn't, Farrell would by far always be the best one to farm in a 6-man group, and that's kind of the experience that I had when playing these tests in Blight League. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little video here, and you guys have a pretty interesting idea of the drop rates and how to kind of get the most out of your Bestiary boss farming. And I'll see you guys in the next video. As promised, I will be doing all the bosses in the game eventually, but I will also be covering Conquerors of the Atlas content coming up as well. So until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.